Hello, everybody. This is the Actionable AI series, part 4, Teaching and Learning, provided by Enrollify. We're going to talk today a lot about AI and teaching and learning. This is part 4 of a 5-part series around understanding AI or actionable AI. We talked about making sense of AI in part 1, talked about AI for student experience, talked about AI for productivity, and today we're going to focus on AI in teaching and learning. And next week, we also have the last part of this webinar series, which is AI Ready Campus. How do you put all these things together and think about that in your campus? I'm Artis Kadu. I'm the founder and CEO of Element 451. And today, we're joined by Andy Koritari. Andy is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at National Louis University. We're very, very lucky to have Andy here on this webinar. He's a practitioner. He's developed so many different programs. He has his hands in a lot of teaching and learning, both from the operational perspective, but also from the pedagogical perspective as well. So Andy plays a pivotal role in the strategic growth and innovation at National Louis University. He encompasses a lot of different things in there, but what I picked up really, and I really appreciate, is new product development, partnerships and acquisitions, nurturing emerging initiatives and models. So he's truly the innovator, kind of leading that innovation at National Louis University. He manages a lot of different divisions, including learning design, career services, and strategic data center, which focuses on business intelligence. Andy oversees a lot of the online operations and learning management and acquisitions as well. He has an MBA from Kellogg School of Management. And if that wasn't enough, and he wants to punish himself, he's actually going for a doctorate right now in educational leadership as well. So he's in the middle of it. He's teaching, he's being taught, so he's doing a lot of things. Andy, thank you for coming to the webinar.
Thanks for having me, Artis. And I don't want to sound repetitious, but I am humbled by actually your activity and how you're leading in this area in AI. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm looking forward to getting into our conversation today. Hopefully, it's insightful for everyone.
I know nothing about teaching and learning, so we're gonna get a lot from the expert today for sure. So I'm gonna share a little clip. This is one of my favorite movies, Good Will Hunting. For those of you who haven't watched it, please watch it. But there's a scene in here where I can kind of represent higher education in a little bit of an interesting way. But I figured I would share this one, and we're gonna pick up on this. But let's take a look.
I was just hoping you might give me some insight into the evolution of the market economy in the southern colonies. My contention is that prior to the Revolutionary War, the economic modalities, especially in the southern colonies, could most aptly be characterized as agrarian pre-capital.
All right, of course that's your contention. You're a first-year grad student. You just got finished reading some Marxian historian, Pete Garrison probably. You're going to be convinced of that till next month when you get to James Lemon. Then you're going to be talking about how the economies of Virginia and Pennsylvania were entrepreneurial and capitalist way back in 1740. That's going to last until next year. You're going to be in here regurgitating Gordon Wood, talking about, the pre-revolutionary utopia and the capital-forming effects of military mobilization.
Well, as a matter of fact, I won't, because Wood drastically underestimates the impact of social...
Wood drastically underestimates the impact of social distinctions predicated upon wealth, especially inherited wealth. You got that from Vickers. Work in Essex County, page 98, right? Yeah, I read that too. Were you going to plagiarize the whole thing for us? Do you have any thoughts of your own on this matter? Or is that your thing? You come into a bar, you read some obscure passage, and then pretend you pawn it off as your own idea just to impress some girls, embarrass my friend? See, the sad thing about a guy like you is in 50 years, you're gonna start doing some thinking on your own, and you're gonna come up with the fact that there are 2 certainties in life. 1, don't do that. And 2, you dropped 150 grand on a fucking education you could have got for $1.50 in late charges at the public library.
Yeah, but I will have a degree, and you'll be serving my kids fries at a drive-thru on our way to a skiing trip.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but at least I won't be unoriginal.
So that is one of my favorite scenes, because who hasn't, imagined actually doing that to somebody else, having that site. that intellectual battle, so to speak, and dropping it. And of course, if you've seen the movie, it's pretty funny. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight from that was, if you look at the cost of education, we talk about a lot of the cost of education. That's not what we're here to talk about today, but we're going to tie it all together, I promise. So cost of education, if you look at it over the last 20 years or so, it jumped 170% over the last 20 years in terms of the inflation. So that 150K in 1998, when that movie came out, it's about 400K plus in 2022 dollars right now as you're going through that education. So, Andy, why is higher education so expensive, or at least the perception, like we're working behind and we're like, no, it's not expensive. Like, we need all this money. Tell me.
We need to add more. No. Well, I mean, being in the industry, right? We're so like trying to like find ways to reduce costs, yet costs keep skyrocketing. And that's not news to anybody here. But there's reasons for that. And I'd like to be sort of like blaming just the industry, right? But it looks at, by looking at like some of those industries that were able to achieve scalability and the costs were reduced, they're a little different than education in the sense that they were able to break away into a scalable innovation that broke away from that need to have, well-paid professionals and the ratios of professionals to actually getting the job done. Well, we haven't been able to break away from that in higher education. So we've mainly maintained those same ratios like over time. But not only that, but we've added a lot of things. Like to deliver higher education today, it's pretty complex. I mean, think about just the buildings. Maybe some buildings are not needed, but like the infrastructure, the systems, the people, the internal requirements, the accreditation requirements that, then require teams of folks to be at the university. Every time we have an innovation in way of a system, well, we have to have people that are going to administer that system and put it in and maintain it and all that. So it's become a complex thing to deliver. So it's not as easy as saying like, the costs have been going up. What it means to deliver education has changed, and we haven't been able to break through. Yeah. But, we're not here, for a doom and gloom day, right? So we're very hopeful, and there's light at the end of the tunnel for sure. And at the very least, what we are hoping that we're at the cusp of is that we are going to deliver much better education. Why not the cost reduction for sure that could come with it? But I believe that we're at the cusp of actually delivering much better education. So I think we have a video coming from Saul Khan from Khan Academy that beautifully describes this.
I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor. And we're going to give every teacher on the planet an amazing artificially intelligent teaching assistant. And just to appreciate how big of a deal it would be to give everyone a personal tutor, I show you this clip from Benjamin Bloom's 1984 Two Sigma study, or he called it the Two Sigma problem. The Two Sigma comes from two standard deviations, sigma the symbol for standard deviation, and he had good data that showed that, look, a normal distribution, that's the one that you see in the traditional bell curve right in the middle, that's how the world kind of sorts itself out, that if you were to give personal one-to-one tutoring for students, that you can actually get a distribution that looks like that right. It says tutorial one-to-one with the asterisk, like that right distribution, a 2 standard deviation improvement. Just to put that in plain language, that could take your average student and turn them into an exceptional student. It can take your below average student and turn them into an above average student. Now, the reason why he framed it as a problem was he said, well, this is all good, but how do you actually scale group instruction this way? How do you actually give it to everyone in an economic way?
Exactly. So until now, we weren't able to do that, and that's the breakthrough, and that's the promise of AI. AI can help get to that one-to-one tutor or teaching ability, because when you get to that level, there is a lot of really great things that can happen. And education is very expensive. It used to be very expensive back, when only the kings and queens and only the aristocrats used to have one-on-one tutors, right? So you had a whole So that was very, expensive then. But anyway, so AI is getting us to that point where we can do that. And however, a lot of the educators in the space, and this is kind of something that we were faced earlier last year, is that there was a huge pushback around AI and specifically generative AI in the classroom because it interrupted and it disrupted some of the classroom, methodologies of grading and kind of was looked as a cheating. And Andy, you have firsthand experience on this on the campus side.
I do. In fact, this is kind of the story that I tell everybody, but the night ChatGPT dropped, a lot of noise on my Twitter. I shouldn't have picked up the phone while I was putting my boys to sleep, but I did. And things like I was seeing exactly things like this on there, like education is dead, our industry is dead. And I was curious. I had seen a lot of AI tools before. I was not very impressed. They look very algorithmic in nature and not the hype. The next morning, I started playing with ChatGPT and I was in shock. And I was, started to show to colleagues and administrators here at the university, and they were in shock too. But what was interesting was that there was an immediate sort of divide. There were those of us who were like, "Wow, my God, this is going to be awesome," and the future, and a lot of folks who were concerned, and rightly so, right? The plagiarism and how do we know anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And both Artis and I are on the camp of we need to, there's so much opportunity here, right? But an interesting fact is that made me decide actually to do my Artis mentioned that I'm doing my doctorate in higher ed leadership, but my dissertation is in trying to figure out how faculty actually think about AI in a deeper level. We know a little bit about the statistics. We're going to share some of those later, but that made me that debate and how folks are looking at this, and sometimes is being looked at, as we know, as an existential threat to many industries, but also to the planet. And what drives that?
We're going to have you back when you finish your dissertation, and we can do a recap. So a lot of things will probably change in 6 months. I'm assuming you're defending this year.
That's the hope. That's the hope. Don't put more pressure than.
It is public now. You're committed. We're going to do it. So however we can help. But we're in the optimist camp, right? As you can see, obviously, we're building technology. We're probably really, really close to it. So we see the potential. A lot of folks who are the doom and gloom camp are perhaps not as close to it, or they are, kind of paying lip service because there's some hidden meaning behind, or there's some hidden agendas around there. But to the everyday person, we're enthusiasts. And when you think about your own institution, there's a study done by Turnitin. This was in October of 2023. 22% of faculty mentioned that they're regularly using, and this is their word regularly, not tested or seen it or done anything. They're regularly using AI in their classroom. There's 22% of that. And only 49% of students are using AI, mentioned that they're using AI regularly in the classroom. So, Andy, what are you seeing on your side? It's probably more like this, right?
Yes, it's actually more like that. And because we know students can be shy at reporting it, right? And I happen to be teaching a course on design thinking and creativity this term. And that course lends itself really well to using AI. So I'm asking students if they had used it, and I was sure. So the hands starting to go up initially, a few of them, then during the conversation, well, everybody's using. So that's my own experience, right? Like, in addition to the data and Artis, we both follow Ethan Malik at the Wharton School, and he's sort of leading the way and teaching with AI. And I think that, he also found this 100% statistics in his class once he dug a little deeper.
Yeah, exactly. Ethan Malik, if you don't follow him, you should probably go ahead and do that. Great guy, a little bit more, a lot of detail in there around AI and leading research. But when you consider that from the institutional side, right, a lot of the institutional folks and CIOs and kind of presidents and even deans, there's a little bit of a fear there. They're like, well, let's wait and see. Arizona State University, as we can see, it's kind of the first university who have publicly come out. And of course, there's a lot of publicity. This happened last week, where they are the first one to partner with OpenAI to provide ChatGPT enterprise available to make it available to all their students, faculty, and staff. And of course, the idea here is to have it in the classroom. But there's a lot of other schools that are actually, doing this. It's just ASU, was the first one to go public with it, I'm assuming.
Artist, it's an equity question here, right? Like in terms
Yeah.
of the usage of it. So, and I found this firsthand in my class. I was asking students to basically, they're free to use AI to build the prototyping in this course that I'm teaching, because that's what it is about, is building prototypes. And we want to see a working prototype. If you want to, I didn't demand the usage, but I said, you're more than welcome to show a working prototype of a website or an app. But a lot of them, like half of them, were using the free version. And as we were conversing, it became clear that maybe they didn't, they would have benefited from GPT-4, let's say, or more, right? So the equity question there is interesting, and if we're asking folks to use it, both students and faculty.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we also, like, as I teach my courses, I'm continuing as I do the AI, evangelism on my side, where I'm like, okay, you got to use the pro version, and that's a disclaimer every single time, because folks get very different results around that. So the equity part of making this available at the institutional level makes it, gets those students so far ahead in terms of what they're doing. So you guys also are a little bit ahead in terms of thinking through how AI is playing in the classroom and operationally with teaching and learning. And you guys have a pretty extensive library on the things that you're doing and how to think about it. So for those of you who want to take a look at, I've added a link here to the NLU AI resources on Teaching and Learning Excellence Center.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the folks in our Center for Teaching and Learning, CTLE, we call it here. And they were on this 30 days into it once ChatGPT dropped, with resources and iterating this. And this has become a wealth of information about AI, teaching with AI, and pre-term, in the term, after the term kind of tools and ways to think about it. And we also had our faculty enrolled in a course at Auburn University is teaching about teaching with AI. And I took that also, but that was a great experience. So there's a lot of movement and a lot of, let's not also forget that this is not simple. So in the course that I'm teaching, it's quite simple because it's about building prototypes. But imagine courses where it's a lot about papers, and we've designed them and put in so much work. And how do we do that? So there's this movement about moving into assessing the process rather than the ultimate sort of artifact. But even that it gets complex and complicated when you look at different subject matter. So I'm not, even though I am pro and very much forward looking and hopeful and excited, there is a lot of thinking to do, and we should remain in control, right? That's the idea. And so the redesign of the course, a lot of things have to change. I mean, I keep saying maybe everything needs to change, but a lot of things need to change in how we design curriculum, how we deliver it. So again, while I'm excited, it's also a complex thing to get into.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to that clip that we showed in the beginning from Google Hunting. Is a regurgitation that's a meaning of learning, or is it more the process, and how do we get to learning how to learn, so to speak? So the idea there is that there's going to always be new stuff, and that learning how to learn is really important, and that's a process of learning that we are kind of diving into at the core of everything that we do. So as part of that, like, we jump into some of the use cases. So we're going to have a bunch of use cases for you guys today, just like we've done practical AI and the rest of the series. We're not just talking, hey, what's the high level here, and kind of jump through it very quickly, but we're going to go deeper and talk about these use cases. We're going to focus on 4 use cases or 4 areas rather, and within those areas, we're going to have 4 different use cases for each one of those. So the first one we're going to tackle is content and curriculum development. Obviously, a lot of content needs to be developed, need to be thought out. So experts tend to do a lot of work there. Personalized learning. Well, actually, we're going to focus on assessment. It's like, how do you build assessment? Because a large part of education is around how do you deliver content, how do you deliver information, how do you deliver knowledge, but then how do you assess that and kind of follow through that loop back? How do you understand that the other person is getting what they need? Personalized learning. How can AI fit into this idea that we all learn very differently? We all have our quirks on how we learn, and we need that personalized learning. And that's another big potential for AI to play in our classrooms. And last but not least, we're going to talk about AI tutors. That's what Sal Khan was talking about, where AI tutors are going to be a vehicle for us to get to that Six Sigma or Three Sigma, not Six Sigma, wow, Two Sigma problem of getting to one-to-one ratio, faculty to student ratio. So let's focus on content and curriculum development. We have 4 use cases in here, or 4 areas. And the first one, it's around ideation. So, if you're putting a course together, if you're thinking about, content assignments or content creation or assignment creation, how do you take a piece of pedagogy and how do you take an outcome, or how do you take something and start thinking about, okay, tests are really difficult. My wife was a high school English teacher, and she dealt a lot with SAT and ACT and teaching a lot of that. So you had to come up with a lot of tests to test different aspects of it. Now imagine AI can do that really, really fast, right? It's like, can you give me multiple questions? Can you do all these things? And then also around ideation on program development, things like, okay, what does the market look like? What are the needs for the skills? Kind of tying that back in with industry. So the ideation process there is really important. So I'm going to hand it on to Andy to talk a little bit more about prototyping, because he's actually been doing a little bit of this curriculum prototyping, which is, I thought it was very fascinating. And like, okay, where does prototyping fit in? I thought you have experts, and then, but he can kind of give us a little insight on that.
So this idea of like, when you're in the sort of innovation spaces and trying to incubate things and get to a prototype quickly, right? So you want like this frequent feedback and very quickly. That's, if you could get to that very quickly and iterate from there, I mean, that's how you move fast. And, with the AI now, it's just made some of these things that used to take a lot of time before, like very quickly. I mean, something that might take a week, you could do it in half a day, or like really in one hour meeting. And an example of that is right now at NLU, we have created this small team to work on this project that our president is very passionate about, creating this 3-year bachelor degree. It's got a lot of cool components in it, but we were exploring some competency-based education and modeling there. So one of the things, and to make it concrete, was to basically turn our general education courses learning outcomes, let's say it would be like 150 or 200 of them, into 60 competencies that were 1 credit hour worth. And so we were exploring with that model. But that sounds like a okay idea, but then if you really want to see it play out in a concrete way, it takes someone to map from those courses that we currently have, because we didn't want to change sort of our gen ed curriculum, create these competencies. It takes time, right? It takes somebody maybe 1 full day, or like going through and making sure we've got the right competencies created. Well, it took us like 5 minutes to do that. And now we wouldn't go out.
That's a great
right?
saving.
Right. It's maybe 5 minutes is too short, maybe a good half an hour, because we were going back and forth and tweaking those and making sure they were fine. But the idea is that we got to what would be maybe 80% right very quickly. And we were able to show that, and iterations from there, like, okay, here's what the assignments would look like. How would this play out in the grand scheme of things? But again, we got a sort of a part of the model prototype very quickly, where before it would have taken a long time, or maybe a lot more people for the same time, right? So that's an example of how, again, when you're still in control, but you're getting to something very quickly, and you're able to see it. You're able to, with curriculum, you can't touch it, but you can see it, the results of that prototype, right? So that's an example.
And then when you think about it, so that's a really good example of kind of this, again, going from ideation to prototyping to having artifacts that you can react to. We're really good about editing and reacting to things rather than coming from scratch. And then that's the hardest part. And when it goes to course content, the third one, if we think about course content, we have, like, as educators, like we are really good at knowing the subject matter expertise. We have papers, we have content, and we have our perhaps our courses, our videos, if you're doing online learning or asynchronous learning. But then how do you take that and you chunk it up and you combine and derive different course content that is in different LMSs that you have to put in different ways. You have to chunk it in different ways. So how do you do things like writing course outlines or syllabi or intros or even video outlines? So AI is really, really good about taking, some piece of information or a corpus of text or however you want to think about it, and then chopping it up and kind of deriving and transforming it into different ways that can be used. So that's a very powerful way. We can probably are going to see things that are going to be a lot faster at producing those courses in different formats as you're taking it online, you can say it, Andy, or you're taking it in person. Compliance is another one. So compliance focuses a lot on kind of how do you comply with standards and how do you make sure that those standards kind of fit in the curriculum, meets those competencies that you actually went in and you got accredited for that. So now, or perhaps you want to accelerate that, right? I don't know. That's another area. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, no, totally. And by the way, we didn't write that with AI, so the misspelling there of the compliance, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Sorry about that. Teaching and
But
learning, we got to have some
yeah,
mistakes.
totally. But both of those areas very important, and learning design teams all over the country, I'm sure, are playing with it. Our learning design team here at NLU, I'm very sort of happy to see them utilizing AI for various areas and functions during the design process. Like usually, typically, like in this projects, you have an instructional learning designer with a faculty member developing a course together that is ready to be taught by that faculty member or others who are coming in, right? So a lot of work goes into these courses, and to create materials that are curated and they're sequenced, and the navigational aspects and everything that needs to be sort of like solid for those courses. AI can be tremendously helpful, and we'll come to some examples shortly here.
Yeah, exactly. So when we think about the tools that we use for these, ChatGPT is probably and GPT Pro is one of the better tools, or probably still the best tool out there in terms of cognitive ability and being able to deal with a lot of text and reason about. Of course, you can use Bard as well. It's gotten really good, or Claude. So we mention all of these as tools, but ChatGPT, we're going to talk about that. And what Andy is kind of done in a couple of different places, I want to highlight GPTs here because these are specific use cases. You take ChatGPT and you can give it some extra instructions or some extra material. And there's a lot of that's happening right now where they're purpose-built or they're modified versions of ChatGPT that do something really, really well, right? They give you answers in a particular way. And one of the ones that Andy of the team has built at NLU, Andy can give us a little bit more. Here's a screenshot of this, but tell us what this is.
Yeah, so this is a custom GPT, which is a sort of like if you're not familiar with these, OpenAI allows you to build sort of like very specific kind of chat GPTs that are pre-prompted or like instructed to play a certain role. So we're building a nursing program, and there's a lot of activities that we need to align to external standards. You see that AACN competencies that we need to align activities to, right? And in the courses. And before, I mean, you would manually do this. You'd go and make sure, like, and look at, and now it could be done very quickly. See an example of that. So this GPT helps the designer, Anthony, who's working with, in this case, who built this, with that task. And is
it a private GPT?
Is it private? I think this one is not private. I think he has built that I can confirm with him, and I think we can share this if it's ready to be shared. But I think this is an open sort of GPT to play with. But this is an example of that, right? We can create things like this for a very specific task to accomplish very quickly. And again, the caveat here is we need to be in control. Our designers double check and make sure that the GPT is not hallucinating. I'm sure you've heard the term.
Exactly.
So I want to emphasize that we need to remain in control, right, and make sure that we know what we're doing. But this speeds things up, and I haven't heard any problems with it in terms of being wrong, or so that's a use case of a GPT in course design.
So here's another one. So I found this very fascinating in terms of content development. Coursera Author, what they're doing is really, really interesting. If you look over here, just that prompt or that they're entering in, essentially you can go in there, you can enter a couple of prompts, and you can say, I want a course about this and this and this. And Coursera or the AI is going ahead and pulling content from different from different libraries in the material and putting a course outline. Of course, you have to go back and you can take a look at that. I didn't want to put a video in here, but take a look at it because they're doing some really innovative things in getting to the holy grail of saying, hey, I have a huge library of things, and now I need to put those pieces together in a pedagogical way that makes sense for this learning outcomes. And Coursera has done some incredible work there. There's a couple of videos that you guys can take a look at, but I was really impressed when I looked at it. Obviously, the ideal here is bringing that to your own LMSs. So everybody has different LMSs. And are you doing any work there, Andy, on the LMS side?
So our LMS is the Desire to Learn, and they have a tool that approximates this a little bit that we're investigating. But our learning design team is also looking at building our own GPT that is kind of the designer, right? They can walk you through just like this one. And we're just in teaching and learning mode in terms of but institutionally thinking about strategically how do you and where do you invest the resources. That's probably a different conversation, but it does come up a lot. Where do you spend resources in building like GPTs or AI capabilities, and where do you rely on the market to bring those to you? And it's a very interesting spot to be in depending on the institution size. And obviously the market is probably the better answer in most cases. Sometimes it pays to play and develop your own thing, and figuring out when to play and when to just look for the best product out there is a key sort of strategic question and something to be figured out. But anyway, let me step down to the teaching and learn.
Buy versus learn. That's the, I deal with that every single day. I'm like, okay, do I spend time building this thing or do I buy it? So buy versus build.
We're kind of doing a little bit of both right now at NLU.
Got it. So when you think about, here's the second kind of area of use case is assessment. And when we think about assessment, there's a lot of really interesting things in here. From the element side, we have our application and decisioning module. So we're trying to introduce some work around that. But one of the things that we see is like this rubric building for assessment. Of course, in decisioning, you do that, but in teaching and learning, rubrics are really important in how you're evaluating somebody. So AI can really streamline that rubric building, aligning them to kind of learning objectives and outcomes for effective assessment, right? So how do you build those things? How do you evaluate? So that's really interesting. When you think about then survey evaluations, Andy was mentioning that he's using some really interesting ways for survey evaluations because this is a whole field within itself in teaching and learning surveys.
Yeah, totally. So this is kind of like inside and outside the courses, right? The survey evaluation, because survey tools are really good at doing the sort of the descriptive statistics. But if you have open-ended questions and you need to do thematic analysis, depending on the tool that you're using, you need to spend some time thematically and analyzing those text entries. With ChatGPT, that's a 5-minute task. Now, again, you need to be in control and make sure that you're prompting correctly and you're sort of like looking and making sure it's it's right, which mostly it is. Actually, it's quite insightful. But we've used it a few times, even outside of courses, but at work when we've done sort of employee and faculty surveys, and we need to do a quick thematic analysis of some of the open-ended questions to drive sort of one of the initiatives that we have. And it did pretty well, right? I mean, the stakes on that one weren't we weren't doing like qualitative research, but we need to get to some themes very quickly. And it seemed spot on, and it saved one of the members of our team probably a day, right? Like to just put those together. And we did in literally about 10 to 15 minutes. So that's an example.
Incredible.
That's, again, it's like this idea of getting to things faster so that we can apply our mental energy elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
On the rubric building and quizzes building, our learning design team, for example, has built a little GPT that is just for quizzes, that does quiz building, where we would get information from our subject matter expert faculty on what the quizzes should be, but then to format that the right way. So with the GPT that we've built, the team has built, you can do that very quickly and get the actual file that you can export in the LMS. So just another example of that. Yeah.
Well, you're introducing a lot of GPTs here, Andy. So maybe you want to go into the GPT building arena. And we don't have, OpenAI has not decided how much they're going to charge or how much they're going to give to their builders yet. But, maybe Maybe they can be an outlet. Coding review. So this is near and dear to me because as a technical company and as I taught, programming and mobile application development, you have to review code all the time. And it's really annoying because it's like you have to trace everything and you have to see if something is right, it's running right. How do you provide feedback? It's like you can do this better here, this algorithm is better. So it's really, really good about that. Evaluating code and giving you comments. It's perhaps one of the best use cases as someone who also from a company perspective, as we're building product and we're writing a lot of code, it's helping us tremendously there and providing that feedback. So code review, absolutely. If you have technical classes that you need to require, and of course, it's really easy to write code with ChatGPT or these tools. So try to like understanding if a student actually picks that up, then goes back to the assessment part, right? So how do you do that? The performance analytics, this is an interesting area because it kind of usually ties in with kind of trajectory of that student and how they're doing in a particular class or classes, and how do you identify performance trends over time. So how do you analyze this data? And this can be good for the administrative side, can be good for faculty as well as when they're offering classes, is in the morning, afternoon, evening, are grades changing? Like those are the things, those trends that you can look at for performance analytics, and you can, sometimes they're built into tools, but sometimes you just get a big Excel spreadsheet and you're like, okay, here's all the grades, here's all the classes that students took over a 2-year period. Let's analyze what's happening with this particular class. All right, so we're going to move on to the third kind of section here, personalized learning. This is an interesting one because it falls into the AI tutoring side as well, but we've pulled out 4 different kind of unique use cases that you can use it for personalized learning. The first one is learning paths, right? So design unique learning trajectories for each student, tailoring education for their pace or style. So in some cases, this is done through tools because you can't really design curriculum for every person in that class because it needs to be done on demand. But there's abilities for you to put together perhaps a longer kind of set of classes. So goes into the advising component a little bit more. It's like, well, how do you kind of tie those together? Andy, what are you seeing on learning paths?
Well, so the artists, you were talking about both learning paths at the sort of the macro level, like
Right.
courses, and also learning paths within a course or within the content.
Right.
And so we at NLU we implemented adaptive learning software for years. I was a big fan initially going into that, but then they had limitations, right? And it's a lot of human hours that go into developing those, and for me, like my opinion, right? So I don't want to get in trouble with the providers there, but my opinion is that we did not have the gains that we were hoping with the adaptive learning platform.
Yeah.
So now, like my hopes are back that we will accelerate that sort of like what we were dreaming, kind of what you were talking about with AI. However, the interesting piece there is how do you combine those sort of that ability to deliver that learning path that fits to the students depending on what they need.
Right.
Also, what we know about how people learn, right? So that's the other interesting thing is like,
Right.
do they learn alone? Do they learn with others? So it's going to be really exciting to see the evolution of those.
Yeah.
Both of the macro, but also I'm really curious in like in the course experience, like and really kind of like motivating
Right.
students and designing paths, but also design them in a way that works for students, because that's where we fall short sometimes. We design those and they're beautiful, but nobody wants to go it alone, right? So that's sometimes a key difference there, right? So it's
Exactly.
Yeah.
It goes back into so it follows through. Then we'll touch base on custom assignments. It kind of piggybacks on what you're talking about. And custom assignments, sometimes somebody comes back and says, well, I need a different type of paper. I need to get evaluated. I need something different because, they weren't part of the mass assignment, or maybe you want to provide different assignments for different groups. This is a way to customize at scale assignments. So you give the goals and you have the basic understanding of the core, but then you can say, okay, customize this area, or here, use this different 4 use cases or this different scenarios in order to kind of build the assignments for a particular. So this comes really handy, for example, if you're doing case teaching, or if you're doing a lot of those different areas where you have to come up with scenarios and you have to come up with use cases, real world scenarios. It becomes really interesting. We'll move on to multimodal delivery because this is an interesting one as we're kind of moving towards asynchronous learning and moving towards kind of online learning. Multimodal delivery becomes really important. I actually do a lot of my reading now. I'd say 80% of my consumption of books is through audio, through Audible, and then the other 20% is, through either my Kindle or physical books. So very different ways. And of course, YouTube is a great example. And when I listen to my books, I listen to them at 1.5 or 1.75 speed. So people are like trying, like when I open my car or somebody comes in, it's like, I don't even understand anything that's going on. So this multimodal delivery of transforming content and course delivery in audio, video, text, and moving them from one mode or the other, AI can be really good about that transformation. So you can feed text to something, you can generate audio, you can generate video, you can feed video, you can kind of come down and generate the audio of that and kind of summaries. The last one, and this is something that, Andy, you have a good example here where it's a kind of a resource intensive example, but breaking language barriers and this multi-language ability to deliver courses.
Absolutely. And we have a very good case for this that we could have used. But so we developed a early childhood education program that's online. It's a very big program here at NLU. And we developed the competency version of that program, and we needed to develop it both in English and Spanish. So there are a lot of resources were spent in translating, right? So we started with English development, then we translated it in Spanish, but it needed to be translated in the right way, right? So that the language was industry specific and translated the right way. So we could, like, I'm sure, like, and maybe it's not there yet now, but it probably is. But like, this is something that would make that effortless.
Yeah.
And a lot of hours were put in that project.
I mean, if you're a really good example, that's outside of higher education, is the speech that the new president of Argentina gave at the IMF forum. He gave it obviously in his native language. However, it was translated through HeyGen. HeyGen is a new AI tool that essentially mimicked the lips in English. And it was very powerful because the rest of the world consumed that in English, right? So it was really, really good example of how you can take something and kind of the transformation. When we talk about these personalized learning, one of the examples that comes to mind is Duolingo as language learning, right? So Duolingo has done an amazing work in kind of personalizing the experience, and it kind of goes back and forth with you. They've also introduced a lot of bots in here. But take a look at that. And if you haven't looked at Duolingo, they've come such a long way in language learning, and the personalization component is just amazing. They're just leading the way there in every single way. So last use case here, or last kind of area, which we think is going to be the most impactful for teaching and learning, is going to be this AI tutors and teaching assistants. So we have 4 use cases in here, but we can just come up with a whole lot more. And you can go back and say, all of those use cases can be accomplished by having specialized tutors or AI tutors and teaching assistants, so to speak. So the first one is this course knowledge, right? So how do you think about putting a whole course knowledge together and having a bot that can be assisting and providing accurate answers about that course? Things like materials, that you can incorporate materials around that course, the syllabus, the reading assignments, and then you can ensure that students are not stuck. So that student is not emailing you and saying, hey, I can't figure this out. What did you mean by this? You can just ask the AI assistant or the teaching assistant around it, and that can provide that answer for you. We're seeing it already. For example, this custom GPTs. Imagine now you can add all the course material in there. You can add the objectives, and now you can have a conversation with that one. The second one, it's around teaching assistant augmentation, right? So we didn't want to say teaching, assistant replacement, but we said teaching assistant augmentation because it's not going to replace it. But usually you have a teaching assistant, or a TA, as we like to call them, and then the AI can act as an on-demand box of knowledge, right? So essentially supplementing these TAs by handling routine queries, administrative tasks. It can be even used for grading, providing feedback, all of those things. And then, Andy, I'm going to go through coaching. We'll talk about coaching really quick, and then you can dive into simulations, because that's an area where I'm not familiar with a lot, but you have a lot of experience there. So when we talk about coaching, of course, everybody has this like personalized coaching from academic guidance to career services, tailored individual student goals and challenges, because teaching and learning is not just about, okay, course material, but it's a lot more than that. It's about, career, and it's a lot, all these different things. But coaching can become really, really important in these AI tutors, and you can be used it a lot in that area, even for personal coaching, right? It's like, okay, what are the outcomes? Here's what I want. Like, what's the path? How do I do that? We're starting to do some of that stuff in our advising components, or our bot in Element, our bulk bot, to have different personalities, and different personas, so it can become more of a coach or advisor rather than just answering questions. And last but not least is simulation. So this is an area where, very intensive. But Andy, tell us more about simulations.
Yeah, I mean, the applications here could be huge, right? For those of us who've taken sort of courses where they had simulations, we know the value that those bring in kind of like making the lessons stick. So there's a lot of opportunity here from simple, case study creations that would be very sort of adaptable to whatever the students, you're teaching or creating, to interactive materials to full-blown simulations. We haven't done any full-blown simulations, but I think I heard one of our team members was building sort of interactive materials quickly in the courses in just one module, right? Like there's an interactive piece that you could build. It's kind of like a simulation, but more of a interactive piece that would otherwise take other resources. But the opportunity here is huge, and I can't wait to see sort of what's going to come out of the simulation world with AI in learning.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're talking about some generative AI components in here, but simulations in the sense of AI for virtual reality and how that fits into this whole medical industry or medical areas where it's very expensive to come up with all this equipment for students to practice on. So it's like simulations become a way for doing that and evaluating in real time. So not perhaps something that's at the grasp for us maybe today for some of us individually, but for institutions, they really should be thinking about AI and simulations as a differentiator for having students be available, not just, for example, in your medical building, but everywhere, and having them with. Of course, I'm a big fan of Apple. They introduced their Vision Pro as well with spatial computing. That's going to be our reality over the next few years. So simulations are going to be important there. When you think about these AI tutors, Harvard, they teach what they call CS50, which is one of their programming courses. And they built this AI tutor for their CS50 course. And they tested it last year. And they wrote a paper on the outcomes of it. Really, really interesting. They felt like the students had their personal tutor, integrating AI enhanced their learning experience. So it was really, really good outcomes for them. And they're looking to incorporate it and kind of make it available for all their other classes there as well. Here's another one, which is Khan Academy. We talked about Khan Academy, but they're incorporating these AI tutors and teaching assistants as part of their, platform. So really, really interesting area for us to take a look at in that. And in terms of the last part, and then we only have a couple more minutes for questions, but very quickly, I've shown this before, but proactive outreach and nudges, AI is really good at that, right? So, this can be at the institutional level, but there's research done that the ability for us to follow through, provide nudges around class assignments, around proactive interventions, case management, celebrating the success, that can be done at the institutional level, those use cases. And it's shown that it increases, and the use of chatbots and AI, it increases the learning outcomes. And what we're showing in here is that Georgia State University study, there was a control group, and the probability of getting a B or above in the course was 60%. When these nudges were introduced, that probability or that outcome for that group with nudges, it went up to 68%. When it was introduced for students or first generation students or first gen students, it became 70%, right? So really powerful in how you think about it.
Artist, can I just wanted to add one piece on that one, and then I know
Yeah.
we're at time, but from an institution's perspective, right, the hope and the opportunity there is huge. how to design elegant solutions, given that we have multiple systems and where the data is a big challenge, how to think about it and what to deploy. But the opportunity, absolutely huge in that world.
All right. So we've had a lot of fun. We can go all day talking about this stuff. Andy, thanks so much for being part of this. We're going to close our series next week with AI Ready Campus. It's going to be at the same time next Wednesday, and we're going to wrap a lot of things and think about how do you think about an AI Ready Campus, the assessments that you need to do, and kind of the readiness assessment, and kind of how do you move forward? How do you pick those projects? How do you think about it? So that's going to be next week, January 31st at 1 p.m., which is next Wednesday is the 31st. And if you're interested in some tools or the toolkit, just kind of a plug in here, my podcast, generationaishow.com. It's all about AI. And in episode 4, we did a lot of tools and tool reviews that can be very useful for you individually and even institutionally to kind of take a look. We went and talked about video generation and audio and all of those things. So take a look at those as you're continuing on your path. Well, Andy, this was so much fun.
It was. Thanks for having me. And you're right, we could talk about this all day. And I'm just, again, in awe of like all the things that you're doing. I'm looking forward to actually seeing the next week's webinar, because that seems very interesting. And a lot of those conversations are happening, and how to be ready. So like, I think that's something to look forward to. But thanks everybody for coming and listening and watching this. Thank you for the questions and for the comments. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Andy, thanks again. We'll talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.